Welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 41, where we're talking about a game that is basically The Matrix, but with better acting. Renegade. And there is no acting.
There is no acting.
Yeah. It's a game about cyberpunk goodness, and we'll get into that in our review in just a little bit. But first, we're going to start by talking about the news. And the news for this show comes from tablefor1.me, which is run by a guy named Frederick Schultz, who's a fan of the show and maintains an excellent website with reviews and news about solo games. And in my opinion, is the best solo news aggregator out there. So many thanks to Frederick for the good work that he does putting that together. You can check that out at tablefor1.me. And our first bit of news this week is that Alexander Pfister, who is famous for games like Great Western Trail and Oh My Goods, he has a new game coming out at Essen this year called Expedition to Newdale. Now, if you've been playing some of his other games, the name Newdale may be familiar to you because it is the name of the fictional town that you encounter in the Oh My Goods legacy campaign expansion that they put out a while back, which turned this little card game into a campaign game with branching paths and all kinds of craziness.
That's still wild to me.
Yeah, they achieved so much in such a small box. Alexander Pfister is already kind of a legendary designer for somebody who's only put out, fewer than 10 titles. I assume it's fewer than 10 titles. He hasn't put out that many, but the ones he has are well regarded. This is basically a sequel to Oh My Goods. It's a board game version of that system. It's set 5 years after the story that you encounter in Oh My Goods, and it has its own campaign. So it looks like it's going to be an 8-game campaign with each chapter being 90 minutes each. And it's hard to tell from the information I've seen so far whether this is going to be like a one and done kind of game or if you play through the campaign and now you've got this game that you can play over and over. I don't really know. I mean, the way Oh My Goods worked was that you just sort of slowly added in more and more of these mechanics and cards and that sort of thing, and your game just got bigger and better by the end.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's reasonable, but I guess we'll just have to see.
Yeah, and we don't have to wait that long because it's debuting at Essen, which is just around the corner, really. Yeah. So just not even a couple of months, just like a month away. So this will be debuting there, and then we'll hit retail in late 2019. So check that out. That's Expedition to Newdale from Alexander Pfister. The second bit of news from this week, which is pretty cool because of the timing of it, is that Vito Lacerda has just announced a small new expansion for Lisboa. If you listened to last week's episode where we review Lisboa, you'll know we both really loved it and got the stamp of approval. When he announced that there's going to be an expansion, my first thought is, no.
Right. No, or where, how?
Right. This game does not need more material. But it turns out it looks like this is going to be a very small expansion. Basically, you're going to, at some point in the game, replace the marquee in the middle of the board with the queen, so the available actions are going to change. It looks like it'll be much harder to get decrees passed after the queen replaces the marquee, which thematically makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. What I like about this, just from what little bit we know about it, is that it doesn't actually add new stuff. It just replaces some mechanics with another. That's good. That's all this game needed.
Yeah, just kind of swapping something out for another thing.
Yeah. I say it's what it needed. It really doesn't need anything, but it's a nice variation to have.
Right.
So, not sure exactly when this is coming out or how it's coming out. I would not be surprised if this was a stretch goal or an add-on or something for the Kanban campaign that's coming up at the beginning of next year. As soon as we know more, we'll announce it on here, but that's the Queen's variant for Lisboa. Finally, our last bit of news for this week is there's an unnamed expansion that has been mentioned by the folks at Garphill Games for the Architects Trilogy. So if you're familiar at all with the trilogy before this, the North Sea trilogy, which most famously includes Raiders of the North Sea, there was a expansion that came out that allowed you to play through all 3 games in the trilogy and have a winner at the end. Sort of a competitive, epic campaign mode. Apparently, the West Kingdom trilogy is going to get a similar treatment. So we already have Architects of the West Kingdom, which we have played and loved and gave the stamp of approval to, and Paladins of the West Kingdom, which neither of us have played at this point.
Nope.
But is supposed to be really good.
Mm-hmm.
And then there will be a third game coming in this series. Apparently, this same sort of campaign treatment will be available for that trilogy. Will come out with the third game on Kickstarter. And it will also add some kind of cooperative play. I have no concept of how this would work.
Did the other one have any kind of co-op thing added into it?
No, it did not. It was just competitive.
Sure.
So this is a new thing for the West Kingdom trilogy. I mean, I'm not sure that this appeals to a very wide audience because you would have to own all 3 games in the set. But it's ambitious in a way that I respect.
Yes. I'm wondering how the co-op mode would, I guess it would basically be soloable just by default.
Yeah, I would assume so. I'm hoping that it's soloable because these games have had solo play built into them, from the beginning.
Right.
I'm not sure how it would work, but man, I'm interested to find out.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this is another one of those things where we don't really know exactly when it's coming out or what it's going to be called, but because that was confirmed by the publisher on Instagram, we wanted to let you know that's an unnamed expansion for the West Kingdom trilogy. And that's all we've got for the news this week. Again, if you would, go to tablefor1.me to check out some more news on that site, the stuff that we didn't cover here. But we're just going to move right on from that into the review, which is for Renegade. Renegade is a game that a lot of you have requested that we review, and for good reason. It is already regarded as kind of a modern classic by a lot of people, and that's probably helped along by the fact that it's designed by Richard Wilkins, aka Ricky Royal from the Box of Delights YouTube channel, who's just delightful to listen to. He is the smooth jazz of the board game YouTube world.
Yeah.
Very relaxing, focuses on solo play, and he designed this game with solo play in mind, which we'll talk a little bit about in our review. So this comes to us from 2018, and Victory Point Games plays 1 to 5 players. And if you're not familiar with what Renegade is, it is and I'm using the language they use here, an abstract Euro thematic deck building game for 1 to 5 players.
It's a lot of words.
It is a lot of words, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those mean and why they're oddly appropriate here. This is a game where you take on the role of a renegade, a person who is somehow escaping the clutches of this massive supercomputer that is controlling the minds of most of humanity. You are hacking into this system, trying to contaminate it and take it down from the inside in a Matrix-style jack-in system. And along the way, you're going to acquire new skills that make you a better hacker, try to fight off the different countermeasures that the system throws at you, and take down this massive AI. That's the point of the game. You just have to survive this machine's machinations long enough to take it down.
Yeah, it took me off guard at first because when I was kind of learning it and figuring out what you're doing, I was like, okay, so what do I do to win? And I was like, oh no, it's just don't lose. There is no win condition. It's just don't lose.
Don't lose the game.
Right.
I mean, it has other little objectives and things that you can pursue along the way that will make your not losing a little easier or harder, depending on how well, you manage to complete those. But the main goal of the game is whether you fail all of those or not, if you just survive to the end, you're good. But that's a lot harder than it sounds.
Oh, it is very difficult.
And we will get to that. But let's start by talking about the components for this game.
Yeah, I thought the components were all just really high quality. I don't know. I mean, there's nothing mind-blowing. There's no minis, just some little cardboard standees, which are have a linen finish print on them. The boards that create this server network thing are nice. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's not anything to write home about, I guess. I would consider it standard quality in 2019 for a board game. What I like about it is they could have upped the production on this and included miniatures and several other upgrades to the components, I'm sure. But it's not a game that needs those.
No.
And because they didn't, the price point is low. The box size is small. I would have preferred it to be in a standard Ticket to Ride size box.
Sure.
But we've covered that elsewhere. If it was in that size box, though, the box size would be too big. It doesn't need something that size, and so they didn't give it that size.
Right. Everything would be just rattling around in there because you don't need that much space.
Right. It's nice. It's not a beautiful production, but it is a standard production, and in 2019, that means it looks great.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and for a game that has a lot of cards, too, the cards are really good quality. Tokens are great. Everything about it, production-wise, is good. I think the graphic design on the cards could have benefited from more artwork, kind of edge to edge artwork instead of a big border around it. Feels a little bit early 2000s to me.
Okay. Yeah, I see that.
It's not bad. It's
Right.
just if I'm looking for something to nitpick on, that would be my thing.
Yeah.
It's very clear that they wanted to put good components for this, but the gameplay is definitely king. So that brings us from the components then into the rules for this game. And here's the thing. There's a lot of game in this box. The rulebook is a little more involved than what you would expect, I think, from a box this size.
I was genuinely confused whenever I first started reading the rules because I was like, okay, well, it's kind of a smaller box. You know, it won't be too bad to get into. And then I got the rule book and I was like, oh, there's kind of a lot of pages in this thing. And then I started reading and I was like, man, there's a lot of thinking I'm about to have to do.
Yeah, man. It reads like a technical manual.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think for some people, their brains will prefer the information organized in this way. There's a lot of words on any given page, and it's intimidating to see points and subpoints laid out like that. It sort of reminded me of a GMT rulebook in that way. Mm-hmm. Not quite that technical, but yeah, there's a lot going on there. One thing I will say, though, it has a lot of examples of play.
Yeah, it has a lot of examples of play. It has a walkthrough at the very end.
That takes up a lot of the book.
Yes.
A lot of this rule book is actually the walkthrough and variants for the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then also flavor, because they give you some background on each of the hackers that you're playing and all that. So rules-wise, I'm kind of on the fence here, because one thing I think it's a really well done rule book. And it covers all the rules for what turns out to be a much bigger game than I expected in a pretty short amount of time. It integrates solo rules throughout the rule book beautifully.
I'm trying to remember. I don't even think it specifies solo rules because it's just integrated in a part of it. You don't have to make exceptions. Am I right in remembering that?
If I'm remembering this correctly, I don't think there's a dedicated solo section, but there are mentions of the solo game throughout. But it just feels more organic. Like normally you read through a rule book,
mm-hmm.
you read all the rules, and now it's like, hey, let's figure out all the ways that this is different that you'll have to flip back and forth to remind yourself of.
Well, see, that's the thing. I'm not even sure if there's much. I mean, it says you can play it solo, and it tells you what to do if you're playing with less than the total player count, which is 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm glad that it was this way, and I wish more instruction manuals were this way, but I was almost confused at first. I was like, well, it hasn't mentioned solo. And then I looked at variants and I'm like, where's the solo section? And then I realized like, oh, no, I just do what it says in setup and then I'm fine.
Yeah, it's really kind of beautiful in that way because you can tell after you finish reading this thing, oh, this was designed by somebody who loves solo games.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening here.
Right.
This is what it feels like to play a game where solo is not only part of it from the ground up, but is a focus of the play.
Yes.
I think the rules here are good. My one little gripe is that this game is self-described as an abstract thematic Euro, right? Or abstract Euro thematic game, or however it is they phrase it. Sometimes the thematic language gets in the way. It's not like Feudum, right?
No.
Which I'll reference from now to the end of time as an example of a terrible way to write a rule book because the thematic language, you just trip over it all the way through. This just made it a little harder for me to sink my teeth into and wrap my brain around what the rules are trying to get at. Okay, sparks and firewalls and countermeasures and all these little things that, I'm glad that there's thematic flair here, but there's not a natural analog in the real world for these things in a way that makes it easy for me to remember what they are, because some of the things that they give names for here sound like they would be like the game's evil measures against you, but they're actually your things.
Right.
Like contaminants. That sounds like something bad. It's actually something good.
Yeah, those are all the good things that you do.
Again, that's not a huge deal, but for me, for whatever reason, it just felt like an unnecessary kind of stumbling block.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think how I feel about it. I'm trying to think of how to describe it as a stumbling block. I definitely did have to like when I was reading through the manual, I was just like, okay, need to look back through the initial parts list to figure out for sure what I'm getting the right tokens, if I understand what this token is, things like that. Yeah, it definitely took me a little while to, I guess, make sure I understood what all the things were referring to.
Yeah, I think that's true for me too. And I don't know, I guess looking back, it feels a little silly for me to complain about this because I'm thinking, oh, I know what those things are now, right? So it's not like they're unlearnable. It's just when you're getting into this, I think the learning curve is made a little bit steeper because of them.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But that little gripe aside, I think the rules are fine. They do a good job of getting you into the game. And also, if you don't like to read rules, Ricky has created, of course, a rules video set on YouTube, a playlist that you can find on the Box of Delights channel. It's great. It walks you through all the different elements of setup and basic rules for the game. Plus, he has multiple playthroughs of this, including a master class. So if you feel yourself several games in feeling like you're not quite getting it, or you want to explore some of the deeper layers of strategy here, he goes into that just a little bit.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a really great thing to have a game designed by somebody who makes video content and makes it well. There are multiple great ways to learn this game. So rules, very happy with. And that brings us to the gameplay for this game. This is just me being honest here. When I first saw this game being previewed for Kickstarter by Ricky, I saw it out on the table and I just thought, I'm not sure that this grabs me, right? Like the board looks just like numbers on an alarm clock or something. Mm-hmm. It's very abstract and I wasn't sure that it had the amount of depth that he seemed to think that it had. And now that I've had a chance to play it, I just want to sum up the gameplay a little bit by saying, this is a game that reveals itself to you in unexpected ways as you play. So usually I read a rule book and I finish and I'm like, okay, I've got a pretty good idea of what the strategies are that you would go about winning the game. Finished the rule book, sat down to play, and I was like, so now what? Not in a bad way, but just like I'm not sure what the best path forward is. I think there's a lot more depth here than you can assume when you read the rules, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I could see that. And especially just because there's multiple different kinds of pieces on the game board. Those are getting moved and manipulated around. And it's one of those, I guess it's kind of experiential in that sense that as you start manipulating with that in the board and going through the game, you start to realize like, oh, this is how this works. This is how it feels to kind of manipulate or move this or keep like open channels or pretend to have control over a section of a board or something like that.
Yeah. This game is basically it's a standard co-op in the sense that every turn the game is going to take turns spreading its influence across the board. And then you on your turn are going to beat back that influence and then try to quell it so that you can survive to win the game. If you're boiling it down to its essence, that's what this game is. And so when I read the rules, what I thought was, well, this is sort of like Pandemic, right? It follows that sort of standard Pandemic formula of things get worse and worse, and you're trying to control it, and you need to somehow overcome it, right, at the last minute against all odds. But when you start playing it, you realize this isn't quite like that. So the way a turn will work is you will roll a die and see where this AI system is going to throw out sparks. This way of like combating you and getting rid of the different contaminants that you're putting into its system. If too many of these sparks pile up on one spot, they can spread all over the board. They can turn into things called firewalls, which are really bad for you and hinder your movement and what you can do on the board. And it just clogs up the board very quickly. And one of the easiest ways to lose this game is to run out of chits. Mm-hmm. You've got, 5 firewall chits, I think, and then 25 of the sparks. That may seem like a lot when you're starting the game, but it very quickly does not feel like many at all.
No, yeah, it all starts coming out pretty fast. I mean, like even in the beginning, I feel like there's a decent amount out, depending upon which of the, I guess, like bad supercomputer things that you're fighting against.
Right, yeah, that's what complicates it even further, is every game you're going to pick one of these SMCs, the supermassive computer, to play against, and each one has different abilities and different difficulty ratings, right? So some of them are just extra hard because they are a harder AI setting. But then their abilities, too, can really put out more of these sparks or move them around in a way that's difficult for you. And there's suddenly a lot to keep track of, right? And that's the primary way this thing beats you back, is by just spreading out this influence across the board, which can get rid of the good things that you're trying to do to survive. But then in response, you have this deck of cards and you're going to draw 5 cards from it. And the cards have these symbols on them. And what you do with these symbols is basically the game from your perspective. You have a few different options here. One option is you can play the card for its bottom half, which is sort of a special ability that card might give you. They're usually pretty situational. So most of the time, you're going to end up using the card for the top half, which includes symbols of some kind. And these symbols are going to let you do pretty basic stuff for what you'd assume would be in a co-op game, right? Like you can move around, you can pick up things and take them with you when you move. You can try to get rid of some of the presence that the AI has on the board, which is tricky because when you take that action, you're spending these symbols and basically just rolling a die, your result versus the AI's die result, but modified with the cards that you put down and other tokens that you have out. So you can just try to remove some of that presence, which is important. You can use that to prevent some of those explosions that are similar to outbreaks and pandemic and that sort of thing. Or you can take moves further away from you than where you are, which is really nice. You can buy new cards for your deck. All of these are possible on your turn in a way that makes this game feel suddenly less like Pandemic and more like Pandemic mixed with a sandbox game.
Yes.
There are so many options on your turn. But basically, what your turn is going to come down to is, do I get a new card? Do I put down some of these contaminants on the board? Or do I try to group up my contaminants so that I can install a bigger program? Because the contaminants are going to allow you to do cool things, move around easier, get rid of enemy pieces easier. But if you can devote the resources to installing this bigger, better version of that thing, it allows you to pump out contaminants a little easier over the course of the game. So you're really investing in kind of the long game when you put out one of those installations. It's an interesting decision because buying cards in this game, which, uses some of those symbols on the card, is a really compelling option.
Yeah. I mean, the cards that you can buy are significant power upgrades, I would say, compared to just the base standard deck that you get.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And what makes that more compelling, I think, is the fact that when you buy a new card in this game, you're taking one of the cards that you use to pay for it and getting rid of it from your deck. So it's always a one in, one out system, which means your deck is always 15 cards. And that's compelling to me because that means, every round in the game, you're going to have 3 chances to draw 5 cards from your deck. It means every round, you are drawing every card in your deck. That is fascinating.
Yeah, I really like it. It was one of those things that, like, just based on expectations of how kind of card-driven games work, or, like deck building or semi-deck building games, I wasn't expecting to get, oh no, I'm going to go through all of these. And so the tightness of that and like replacing your cards and your deck's always this kind of lean, mechanism. Yeah, it was different, but it's really interesting in how that works or how it plays out.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've just never seen another deck builder quite like it. And it just mitigates some of that randomness that's inherent in deck builders, right?
It also makes it feel not like a deck builder to me.
Right, yeah, that's true.
I mean, I get, like, I don't think it's wrong to call it a deck builder, but yeah, it's more just like your list of actions, and they're all going to come out. It's just what order they come out and how you have them available to you at different times, through each round. But they're all coming out. Yeah,
I think that's true. It feels very much like Mage Knight in that way. Although in Mage Knight, you just, you keep growing your deck. Your deck does get bigger. I mean, you have the ability to manipulate your deck a little bit more. It's not full-on Dominion level deck manipulation, right? But you're just like Mage Knight, you're using the cards to actually take actions on the board. But yeah, something about keeping this a closed unit, that 15-card unit, is so fascinating to me because it's like you give up some of that flexibility of managing your deck, but in return, it feels more like an action selection game than a deck builder.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
It's pretty fascinating. I heard another reviewer describe this game as a pick up and deliver game because you can pick up, different contaminants and carry them with you and, pile them up in one space to build up an installation or get them out of the way of where a potential spark explosion is going to be that will render some of your contaminants useless. And I get why you would say that. It's an important element of the game, picking things up and carrying it. But it's definitely not a pick up and deliver game.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can see why someone would make that statement. It's just not, I just don't think it is, though.
Yeah, and the same thing is true with the deck building element, right? I don't think I've ever heard anybody call Mage Knight a deck building game. That, to me, it feels just as foreign here. It's an important element of the game, for sure, but to call it that just reduces it to something less than the sum of its parts, I guess. That deck building mechanic is so compelling, but because it's so different and because it gives you so many options and control at the same time, it just makes the whole game feel unlike anything I really played before.
Yeah, there's no just completely wild, out there, innovative mechanism or anything like that, but it's really interesting how it all works together. It's all different enough and very tightly integrated with one another that it doesn't feel like anything else I've ever played.
Yeah, I think you'll come to this, and on your first play, you'll be a little overwhelmed by the rules and the options, but you'll think, well, this is just kind of a standard co-op game. Fight back the bad thing, put out good things, and make it through and you're good, right? But then you begin to appreciate some of the little things that are part of this system. So for one, as a solo game, you can play this with just one deck and one hacker and have a great experience. And part of the reason it can be a great experience is because your hacker has their own special power. That special power is going to radically influence how you play that particular game. You're going to pick one SMC to play against. Its special power will radically influence how you play the game. And then on top of that, you have these copper, silver, and gold cards that give you sort of a mini objective to go after. You don't have to beat them to win the game, but if you fail them, you're going to be punished.
Yes.
And if you succeed, it's going to give you just a little bit of a boon, which you'll really want.
Yes.
There are a lot of those cards in the game, and you're only playing with like 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, I think it's typically 3 to 4, if I remember right.
I mean, it varies from SMC to SMC, but it's mind-boggling because the amount of possibilities that it creates just in that kind of setup suddenly means, oh, there's not just variability here in terms of just simple, like I'll encounter different things in the game, but my playstyle is going to need to change radically depending on what the SMC I'm playing against, which countermeasure cards come up. It's a really fascinating kind of system.
Yeah, those little mini objectives that you have that come with each different SMC, or when you start that game and you draw a random one, it really changes because the goals you have they're going to be different, and it's just going to change your strategy and approach to it. And not to mention just how those interact with, we haven't really mentioned that the board state is like different every time. It's like randomized.
Yeah, with the modular tiles.
Tiles. Mm-hmm.
And actually, here's another layer that begins to present itself as you play a couple of games. You get to pick the layout of the board, or you get to set the layout of the board at the beginning of the game. And that might just seem like an element of setup, but you get to know what the SMC's power is. You get to know a little bit about what's coming up next. And I believe that setting up the board is an important part of playing the game, because you can set up the board in such a way that you make it really hard on yourself for this particular kind of SMC. And I think that in some of the videos that Ricky has done, he mentions that people underestimate sometimes how important setup is. But for some of these SMCs, you're going to want a more open, spread out board. And other times you're going to want it to be really closed and, not to have any gaps between the different servers and that sort of thing. Is really interesting. Setup is not an element of the game that I consider to be interesting gameplay most of the time. But in this one, by game 4, I was starting to see the value of it.
Right. It was one of those things that in the beginning, it was like, well, I know this affects something and I'm probably hosing myself later on, but this is what I'm going to do. But as you play it more and you get to kind of understand how things are going to play out and get some of those nuances, you're like, okay, I'm going to put this here like this. And then you also get to place those initial information tiles that help with like movement and just these really subtle little things. It all kind of comes together, and I don't know, in a really good way.
Yeah, we like to talk a lot on this show about how it feels to play a game, because I think that's important. I mean, just being in love with the idea of a game and the experience of playing are two very different things. Mm-hmm. For me, what really made this game compelling for me at a level that I felt was this game grows with you in a way that I haven't experienced for a while. So there's this great walkthrough in the rulebook that really eases you into the mechanics, and you start to feel like, okay, I've got a sense of what's going on here. And then you realize like, oh, setup means more than I thought it did. Oh, and this installation here, this power means more than I thought it did, especially in conjunction with this SMC. And then on top of that, if you start to feel like you're really kind of uncovering the secrets of what the base game has, and you are starting to feel like you want some more interest in variability, the flip side of these tiles, there's a whole nother kind of map for the board that changes up how you treat the spaces on the board, right? Like which ones are open to you and which ones are not, and how sparks flow and all that. It's interesting because there's just so much in the box, and it eases you in, but it's like you can go as deep as you want to.
Yeah, you can really, I mean, I guess it would ramp up the difficulty, but I was going to say, like, you can really ramp up the variability if you want to, and just, yeah, like you said, just the depth of it.
Yeah, it really surprised me because this is a small box. And, you know, you read through the rules and you think, okay, sort of Pandemic, or you mentioned like sort of Spirit Island-y in the way that like things populate the board and spread.
Yeah, it's a lot of, there's things on the board. And I guess I'm really even thinking, especially with the expansion to Spirit Island, I forget what the name of it is, that adds like the beast tokens and all that stuff.
Branch and Claw.
Yeah, Branch and Claw. Anyway, just there's a lot of tokens. Some are negative, some are positive, and it's like manipulating the board, trying to move things around, trying to make certain things come down, and there's always things pressing in on the progress that you're making. And so it reminded me of that. It doesn't feel like Spirit Island, but it's more like that, I guess, in my mind, of that kind of manipulating lots of tokens on the board that are both good and bad.
I definitely feel that here. It doesn't have that strong thematic punch that Spirit Island has.
Right.
But it does give you that feeling of like every now and then you think, oh, I'm better at this than I thought I was. You know, or I've grown as a player from game one to now. And certainly you grow as a Renegade from the beginning of the game to the end of the game because your deck gets better and better and more honed as you go through. I just think the thing that sticks out to me about this game is growth. Within the game and from game to game, there's so much room for you to grow as a player as you encounter the different systems that are here. And it just feels like this is one of those games that punches above its weight a little bit. It's not a light game by any stretch.
No.
And the rule set is not lightweight either, but there's more room here even than the rule set would lead you to believe, I think.
Yeah. I was definitely expecting a lighter game before I really got into it. And then I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to really think pretty hard. It's not like a brain burner or anything like that where I just felt exhausted, but you have to be paying attention. You have to be trying.
Yeah, you really do. And for a game of this price and of this size and setup time, not bad at all.
No, very quick setup. Once you get the basics of kind of wrapping your head around how everything works, really quick setup time. And
I would say the gameplay for me is like an hour to an hour and a half. And I could probably get it quicker than that if I wanted to.
It's probably a solid hour and a half for me.
Yeah, it's definitely not a quick game, but it does feel like a mini Mage Knight to me in terms of thinkiness and growth and weight, but without like the 45 pages of ridiculous rules that you have with Mage Knight.
Yeah, I feel like I've barely played any Mage Knight. I know you've played a ton.
Yeah.
But the times that I played, and maybe this is just my lack of experience with it, I felt like I had more agonizing choices to make in Mage Knight than this game.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely like a lighter weight version. I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. And it doesn't feel like this open world of possibilities like Mage Knight does. But it does feel sandboxy in the same way. And there are elements of like the card play that are similar, like where in Mage Knight, one of the thinkiest parts is you can take these cards that you really want to use for the ability that's printed on the card because it's more powerful that way, but it may not fit your given situation. So you can just turn it to the side and use it for +1 move or +1 attack or block. And that decision of whether to do that or just to go with what's printed on your card so you have the most efficient turn is an agonizing choice. For here, you still have that flexibility of like you can use a few of your cards to give you one of any symbol you want. That's a really tough choice, but it's not brain melting like Mage Knight.
Right.
It's sort of the best of both worlds in some ways. If you're the kind of person who likes the idea of Mage Knight but finds it just crippling with the amount of choices and its depth, I feel like this is a good analog for that. It's a nice kind of step down in complexity, but was still really rich experience.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the rules and the gameplay and the replayability, which I just can't say enough good things about. One small note that I'd like to put in here is if you do want to expand this, there are expansion options available, but not an overwhelming number of them. And they don't add like a ton of new rules and everything. 2 little booster packs that cost $7.99 and $8.99 on the Victory Point Games website. One adds more cards to add to the store you can add to your deck. The other one adds more SMC and countermeasure cards. That's it.
Yeah.
And that increases the replayability an extreme amount for $15.
Right.
So I really like that system quite a bit.
Yeah.
We've said enough about this game. It's obvious that I like it, and I really like what it's doing here. Let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly for this in summary. For me, one of the best things about this game is just how challenging it is and complex it is without being crazy difficult and without having a huge rule set. That feels great to me in this game. It's not overly expensive. It doesn't take a ton of time to set up, and yet you get an epic feeling experience. And I mean epic in the sense that you grow quite a bit within one game and you overcome great odds within a pretty short playtime.
Yeah, just this seems almost detached from the gameplay itself, but it's just so much value in the package size, costs, and just replayability and depth of play that feels good and is great. It's a lot of depth. There's definitely times when this game would be too much mentally for me because I just want to relax and play something easier. But this game is never just going to wipe me out mentally. And it's just going to be, if I just want a good, satisfying challenge, that is, I'm going to have to think and I'm going to have to really work for if I'm going to get it. Yeah, I don't know. It hits a really nice balance in those regards.
Yeah, absolutely. With just a ton of replayability options.
Yeah.
I love that between the variants that are there and like the expansion options, but even just with the core game in the box with all the different cards that could be used that come up. I'm amazed, really, that with such a quick setup time and the price point that this is and all that, just how many options there are in here. Love that about this game.
Yeah.
That substantially changed the way the game feels from game to game.
Yes.
All that is great for me. If I had anything bad to say about this game, it would just be that there's a steep learning curve.
Yes, it's pretty steep. I feel like it takes some time. I didn't watch any videos on this one, which I probably should have. That probably would have made my life easier. But I feel like the rules were good enough to where I could understand everything. But at the same time, yeah, it did take a while for me to kind of wrap my mind around some things and how it works. And it was like I understood what the rules were saying, but I didn't understand what I was supposed to do with that information yet.
Yeah. And I think everybody's going to have that experience to some extent. It's going to take you a couple of games to ease into this, and I don't know if this is going to be a bad for everybody. It's not really for me, but I'm going to put it here just in case. This is the kind of game you really need to dedicate yourself to for a while, I think. If you get it and play games like once or twice and then put them on the shelf and don't think about them for a while, I don't think you're getting what this game has to offer you.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that.
You need to be willing to like devote yourself to it for a little while and uncovering its secrets and playing several games, then put it on the shelf if you want to. And I think you'll find yourself wanting to revisit it more than you might think initially. There's a lot going on here that I'm really pleased with. When you do come back to it, all that depth is waiting for you, and you'll have to kind of relearn it a little bit. But I just feel like this is a game that's going to stay out ahead of you for a while, but you do have to have the time.
Yes.
I don't think there's anything else bad that I would say here.
No.
And certainly nothing that I would say is ugly about the game. I mean, the technical, like thematic language that's in here, I'm not a big fan of, but the more I think about it, the more I think it's not an ugly thing. It's an attempt to put some theme in here, and the theme does make sense.
Yeah.
It's just an initial hurdle.
I would agree with that.
So here's where we come to the difficult part of this review. Is this a stomp of approval game for you?
Yeah, I had a lot of mixed feelings on whether or not I want to do this. And not because, is it a good enough game? Is it well designed? Anything like that. It clearly is a really tight design. I really like it. There's so many things that it checks off. I don't love this game as much as some other games, even games that have maybe some other like little problems or things that have some kind of flaws, but I just love them for whatever reason, more for just personal taste reasons. But yeah, I don't know. I think I have to give it the stamp of approval. It's really solid. It's just a lot of fun. It's compelling. I don't know. Like, there's a lot of other solo games that I love more, but it's still just such a good game.
And the thing is, we don't talk about this very often anymore. And if you started this podcast from the beginning, you'll know I've always been the solo gamer of the two of us. I will play solo games over watching TV or playing video games. I just love solo gaming. Part of the idea for this podcast when we started is Carter is the person that you can more easily identify with if you're like solo curious, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. Or you just want to know, like, you prefer to play games multiplayer if you're going to play them, but every now and then you just want to play something solo. This is not your thing. Even
Right.
41 episodes in, this is not
Right.
your preferred way to spend your free time.
Right. Yeah. It's never going to be really the default. It's more of just if I just absolutely have to play a game and I can't play with someone else or something like that, I will play a game solo.
It's not torture for you to play these games
No.
and review them.
Right. It's not torture. It's just I just really, really want to play with other people.
Yeah. And I see where you're coming from here, because for me, like, this is so interesting. I really love this game on a lot of levels. I think the mesh of mechanics here is brilliant. I have never seen a game that combines deck building done this way with the kind of pandemic formula, but also kind of a mage knight thing going on. And I guess pick up and deliver Rado, if that's what you want to call it. It works for me on so many levels. Fast setup time, incredible depth. And yet, like, I'm not going to get this out all that often. And part of it, it's becoming harder and harder for me to judge, like, what makes a great stomp of approval game, because the pace at which we play and think about games has increased dramatically since we started this podcast. I just don't get a chance to revisit games as often as I would like. And so when I have a chance to play a game that we're not reviewing, I typically reach for one of my top 10 games. So like my active game pool shrinks like dramatically. So I don't even know how often I would get this game out to play it. But as somebody who had to play it several times for review, I'm just looking at it thinking like, I want to play it more. And that to me is the mark of a really great game and the kind of game that deserves a stomp. I want my life to be in a place where I can get this game out as often as it deserves to be played.
That might be a ways off. Hate to tell you.
Yeah. Sometimes I dream of the day when I'm like in my late 60s and I'm retired and I finally get to play all the games on my shelf as often as I want to. And I've only got like 42 games, right? So by comparison, not that many.
Right.
But yeah, man, time being what it is and everything. There's some games though that I look at and I'm like, I want to play you more and more and more. This game has so many things in store that I just can't not give it the stomp. I love this game. And I could see where, like, even if you're not in a place where you're like absolutely in love with it, there's so much here to recommend and to respect that this makes it a different kind of situation.
Yeah.
So this is a game that we are going to give the stomp of approval to. And yeah, it's so funny. I kept hearing this game referred to as basically a modern classic, which is crazy because it came out in 2018, right? It's not been out that long.
Right.
And I wondered if there was any truth to that. And there definitely is. If you have not tried this game yet, and you think the theme appeals to you and the length of play and all the factors that go into purchasing a game, give this game a shot. It's going to be one of those games that's like a classic that flies under the radar for most people out there, I think. And it's not going to get the wider attention that it deserves as a design, because I think this game shines really at one player.
Yeah, I would think so too. I don't think it'd be bad with other people, but it works so well solo.
Yeah, absolutely. As a one-handed, or if you want to step it up and get more interaction, you can play it two-handed as well, which a lot of people do. Mm-hmm. Either way, excellent game. That's Renegade from Ricky Royal and Victory Point Games. That gets the stomp of approval from us. And That's all we've got for this episode, folks. If you like this show and you want to find other great shows about board games that are similar to what we do, go to dicetower.com and check out other shows that are in the Dice Tower network. We are part of this network of shows that was started by folks like Tom Vassell, who is the host of the Dice Tower, and it's just a great family of shows that are family friendly and informative. And if that's what you're into, go check out dicetower.com to see what other shows are out there in the network. Also, one big announcement is that we're going to be giving away a copy of Renegade with both expansions to a lucky listener. So if this sounds like your game and you're interested in checking out a copy for yourself, go head over to our Facebook page to learn how you can enter to win a copy for yourself. Speaking of Facebook, if you don't yet like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram, you should, because we post occasional pictures, very occasional pictures of us playing board games and me losing to Carter occasionally, mostly me playing, solo, that sort of thing.
Okay. I feel like you win probably more than I do whenever we play.
That's not what my Facebook posts say.
Okay.
Yeah, follow on Facebook and Instagram to get the truth about who's better at board games. It's Carter.
Yeah.
So go ahead and follow us there. If you like the show and want to support us, you can go onto iTunes and rate and review the show. That helps us to increase our visibility, and it's a great way to get the word out. Finally, we have a micro badge for this show that you can get on Board Game Geek. It costs 8 Geek Gold, and if you don't have that Geek Gold to spend, send me a message and I will happily spot you the Geek Gold you need to get it. How many times can I say Geek Gold in one sentence? Too many times. I'm happy to spot you. Every time we mention this on the show, people take us up on it. You should take us up on it this time. And that's all we've got for this episode, folks. Until next time, I'm Brandon Waite.
And I'm Carter Mackey.
This is Solosaurus.